In this video, I'm going to share with you 9 ways that highly effective CEOs manage their time to maximize what they get done. These are all tips and insights I've gained over the last decade from helping CEOs in 16 different countries to take control and become more effective in their role. If you're new here, my name is Byron Morrison. I'm the author of The Effective CEO, and make sure you hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos. One thing just to be clear about up front is that obviously a big part of managing your time is going to come down to effective planning. With that being said, while I will touch on this in point number 9, I'm not going to go into it in huge detail because I've got another training that covers everything from how to plan your days, weeks, and months to really know what you need to get done to drive your business forward. And I'll talk to you about that at the end, and I've also got a link to access it in the description of this video. The first thing highly effective CEOs do to manage their time is they know their clear outcomes and priorities. This is so important because if you're just going into your week with a never-ending to-do list of stuff that you need to get done, there's no real clear direction. And if you don't have a target to aim for, you're gonna miss. This is why with all of my private clients, what I recommend that they do is once a quarter, they remove themselves for half a day from the business. They go to a different environment where they set the expectation with their team. They're not going to be available. They turn off their phone and messages, and they sit down with the focus of, I'm going to map out the next 90 days. They get clear on their outcomes, their goals, their targets, the key things that they need to move forward. The reason why this is so important is then they can start to manage their time through the lens of really auditing what they take on. They can go into the week where new things get sent their way and new opportunities come up. They can really start to think, is getting this done going to get me closer towards my 90-day targets? If the answer is no, then they can actually have the insight to push back and make a decision not to commit to this right now. Because the thing you have to recognize is that everything you take on has a cost. Every hour you spend in one thing is an hour that you're taking away from something else. And so many first-time CEOs and leaders are their own worst enemies because their default way of doing things is just to say yes to stuff without stopping to think whether or not they actually should. And this is why one of the best things you can do is really get clear on what are the outcomes, what are the objectives, where are you going, and then you can use that insight to better understand what you're committing to and taking on. The second way that highly effective CEOs manage their time is by reverse engineering the week. I speak to so many overwhelmed CEOs who come to me saying that they're so busy, but they don't feel like they're getting much done. They get to the end of the week and they just don't know where their time went. And the reason being is often because they're stuck in the weeds, spinning their wheels, or not being intentional about what they actually get done. And this is why the advice that I always give to people is you need to get clear on what a successful week looks like. And one of my favorite ways to do that is to really think about as you're going to the week, what would have to happen by 5 p.m. Friday for this week to be a success? What would you need to have moved forward to feel like you've actually made progress? The reason why I love that question is not only does it give you a clear insight of, okay, these are the priorities and things I need to do, it also means that you can be at peace with what you get done. Because the reality is when you're running a business, there's always going to be so many things that you could be doing. And this is why a lot of the time you're going to feel like you're not doing enough or you should be doing more. And this is why by setting that intention at the beginning of the week, you can wrap up the week knowing like, I did what I said that I was going to. And then you can take this a step further as you go into every single day. Again, use the same question. Think about it. At the end of the day, what would need to have been done for this day to be a success? How much time do you have allocated for your key tasks and priorities? When you slow down and you really figure this out, you're then going to make sure that you're actually committing the time to move forward the things that are important for the business, not just dealing with what's important in the moment or reactive problems. The third thing highly effective CEOs do to manage their time is being realistic with what they actually take on and what they can get done. So many of the first-time CEOs I work with set themselves up to fail because they're constantly overcommitting and overloading themselves. They don't anticipate how long certain tasks are going to take, and because of it, they just put so much on their plate that they're never going to get around to actually moving it forward. And this is a huge issue because not only does it overwhelm them and cause them to become stretched thin, it causes frustrations in the team because they're seeing all of these projects getting stalled and things aren't hitting the deadlines that were set. And it also leaves them in the cycle where they feel like no matter what they do, it's not enough. They're not making a dent in the things that they said they were going to get done. To make matters worse though, because they go into their days and weeks with this huge to-do list on their plate, it keeps them in this state of anxiety and stress, which, as I'm sure you've seen, there's no way you can make the right decisions or show up at your best when you're in this state. And that's why if you want to be more effective in managing your time, you have to be realistic with how much you're actually taking on, especially since so often that pressure and expectations are ones that you're placing on yourself. And this is why the way I always advise clients to approach this is to, again, reverse engineer the week. Go into the week and have a look at, okay, beyond your usual meetings and your other commitments, realistically, how much time do you actually have available? To keep it simple, let's say you go through then you see, okay, I have 10 hours that I don't have anything scheduled that I could set aside for high value work. Then take it a step further and really think about, okay, on your average week, how much do you get pulled into things that you simply can't predict, into other people's challenges and problems and other things that are going on? To keep it simple, let's say it averages out to about 2 hours. That means that you have 8 hours in order to focus on stuff that is going to drive the business forward. Then start going through your to-do list and really be realistic and be like, how long is this going to take? When is this needing to get done by? And you can start to see, okay, this is how much time I have. These are the things that I can actually take on. And you have to really be honest with yourself here, because if you're convincing yourself that something can be done in 20 minutes when actually it's going to take 2 hours, you're just setting yourself up to fail. And then the next thing is to set aside time to actually schedule and plan these items. Because what you don't want to do is set aside 2 hours on a Tuesday afternoon to work on your high value work. You get into that block and then you sit there and think, what do I actually need to do? That's going to waste a lot of time that is not being put to effective use. And this is why I'm a big advocate for actually planning and having a clear intention. And like I said, I go into that further in the training that you can access in the description of this video. The fourth thing that effective CEOs do to manage their time is to actually schedule their high value work. I'll give you an example of this and then I'll talk you through how to do it. So I had a first-time CEO come to me who was going through this explosive period of growth. They'd scaled massively over the last few months and they were about to go into another fundraise. Because of that, most of his time had to be spent on dealing with investors, writing presentations and doing pitches. But when he came to me, he found himself in a situation where he was following the standard productivity advice. He'd create a to-do list, he'd figure out what he needed to get done, and then he'd go in and attack the day. The problem with that though is because he had so much on his plate, if he was lucky by 3 p.m, maybe he'd get an hour to focus on the kind of fundraise and everything else that needed to get done. And this was a huge problem because by that time, he was mentally and emotionally drained. He didn't have the energy to be creative. And this is why I had to challenge him on this, because it was like, yes, all these other things are important, but if he didn't get the fundraise in place, there wasn't going to be a business to be pulled into reactive problems for. And this is why we had to change the way that he approached his day, because like I said, he was following all of this standard productivity advice. Well, while this makes sense on paper, it can be absolutely catastrophic if you want to be a highly effective CEO. The reason being is just having a to-do list and figuring out your key priorities often is short-sighted. It's focused on what is important that day without factoring in the bigger picture and what you need to get done. This is why, to be an effective CEO, we have to be more intentional with balancing short-term priorities with your long-term commitments. So going back to this client, the way that we did it is we figured out, okay, how much time does he need every single week to do these high-value tasks? We averaged it out that he needed about 15 hours to focus on investor relations, writing pitches and presentations. Great. We then looked at, okay, what headspace and energy does he need to be in and when does he do his best work? For him, like a lot of people, he finds that in the morning, he's most energized and creative. So the way that we approached it is we blocked off 9 until 12 every single day. This was going to be his high value work time. It was communicated to the team that he was unavailable, he wouldn't be taking calls, and they weren't to disturb him during this period unless the building was on fire. He would then get that done, And the key thing with this as well is he also wouldn't check his messages and emails first thing in the morning. The reason being is there's never anything good there. So what would happen if he looked at it is it would be all of these problems that needed his attention. His mind would then go to that and he wouldn't be able to focus on executing what he needed to do effectively. So that was the boundary that we set in place. Then he'd get through that. At 12 o'clock, he'd take a break, have some lunch. Then he would refocus and start his day with all of his meetings and his other short-term priorities and the rest of his to-do list. By doing this, he could really defend that time to manage it effectively, to move forward the things that were actually going to have the biggest impact on the business. So I would really encourage you to think about, where does your time have the greatest impact? What is your high value work? What are the things that related to your 90-day or year-long targets do you have to move forward? And you need to defend the time and schedule it every single week, especially since in the moment, something else is always going to feel like it's a bigger priority. And that's why you need to really schedule these in a way that you view them as non-negotiables. These are things that you have to make the time and energy for. Otherwise, you're just going to get stuck in the weeds and you're not going to get anything of value done. The fifth thing that effective CEOs do to manage their time is they structure their days around their energy and state of flow. I'll give you an example. I had one CEO come to me who, the way he was approaching his day is him and his assistant would look down, they would see what time he had available, what things he needed to get done, and they would just slot it in. And while that was fine, the problem is a lot of the time, he just didn't have the energy and focus to move these tasks forward. It was like when he had a day of really stressful meetings and an intense board meeting, he would just have a block of time afterwards. So he'd throw in working on a report. The problem is though, that report was really detail orientated. So at the end of all of the meetings, he was mentally drained and he just couldn't focus on it. So what would happen is either he just wouldn't do it, or something that could take 20 minutes would take 2 hours because he'd have to keep rereading and trying to figure out what was going on. That was why the way that we had to get more intentional with it is when he was planning, he also needed to take it a step further and ask himself, how much energy and bandwidth do I need this task? Am I going to have enough of that when I'm allocating this time? The reason why this is so important is you can start to really think about, are you actually going to have the energy to follow through with this effectively? If the answer is no, either you need to restructure the day or you need to put it in at a different time when you can actually do it properly. When you start to really look at your tasks based on your energy and bandwidth, you're going to find that you make much better use of your time because you can show up for them in the headspace that you need to actually follow through with them. The sixth way that effective CEOs manage their time is by implementing the right boundaries. I'm sure you know words like where you go into the day filled with the best intentions, you've got a clear plan, you know what you need to get done, and then all of a sudden you get pulled into other people's problems. I see this with so many first-time CEOs where their default way of operating is that as soon as something comes up, they drop what they need to get done to dive in to fix something else. And while their intentions might be in the right place, this can be catastrophic for long-term growth because it means that they're spending all of their days stuck in the trenches dealing with other people's issues and not actually getting done what they need to do. And this is why I always have to challenge them to start to recognize that if they want to manage their time effectively, they have to push back. They need to start doing things on their own agenda, not on the agenda of other people. Setting the right boundaries isn't just going to be with other people though. It's also going to be with yourself. It's really knowing your patterns and behaviors and tendencies and where you're your own worst enemy, diving into things that you shouldn't. This is going to be one of the most important things that you need to get right if you really want to effectively manage your time. And that's why I don't just want to skim through it in this video. And instead, I've made an entire other video all on defending your time with tips and strategies and ways that you can really maximize what you get done. So you can find that on the playlist on this channel, or I'm going to link it above with the direct link so that you can go and check it out when we're done. The seventh way that effective CEOs manage their time is they're highly intentional and deliberate to what they commit to and prioritize in every area of their life. Because how many times have you said to yourself that once you hit that next goal, that next milestone, that next threshold, that's when you'll take some time off, you'll prioritize your health, you'll be more present with your family. But isn't that what you said the time before and the time before that? The reality is we all do this where we say to ourselves that at some point in the future, life is going to be easier. The thing is though, It never is. Because in business and life, every new level of success is going to bring with it new levels of problems. There's going to be new commitments and new demands and new things that need your attention. So if you keep saying to yourself that at some point in the future, it's going to be easier and you're going to have more time off, you're just setting yourself up for a life of being stretched thin and burnt out, or even worse, getting to a point where you start to resent your success and question whether or not the sacrifices that you're making are actually worth it. And this is why if you actually want to follow through with this, you need to become far more deliberate with what you're actually doing. Because how many times do you say to yourself, like, today I'm going to have date night, or I'm going to get to the gym, and then your day gets away from you, and today turns into tomorrow, then to next week. And despite the best intentions, something always has to give, and it's usually the things that matter most. This is why with my private clients, the way that I get them to approach this is with what I call ideal life creation. Essentially, what you need to do is to start with a blank calendar and then figure out what are the things in your life that are most important. Time with your family, time with your kids, date night with your partner, time to exercise. What are the non-negotiable key life things that you have to make a priority? Then, rather than hoping that you'll get around to them, these have to be scheduled first. By doing this, what you can then start to do is build the rest of your life and calendar around these commitments. But scheduling it alone is not going to be enough. You also then need to make a decision that unless the building's on fire, you're going to treat these the same way that you would your meeting with your most important client. That unless something comes up that's absolutely essential, you're not going to cancel. And the way that you do that goes back to one of the previous points I made in this video. You have to start looking at how you structure your days and what you put directly before these events. I'll give you an example. I had one client come to me who was having a lot of problems in his marriage. He wasn't making time for his wife. Even when he did, he was there physically, but mentally he was checked out and attached to his phone. And part of the problem was he would schedule date night, but then he would have a day full of stressful meetings and they would overrun. So either he would have to cancel because he's running late, or he'd just be mentally stressed thinking about everything that was going on. So the way that we turned it around is we got far more deliberate with how he structured his time. Say Tuesday evening at 7 o'clock, he had date night. We would look at, okay, what are the things that he has directly before? He would make sure he had the boundary in place that he wouldn't have board meetings or conversations that would be stressful or mentally taxing. He would have stuff that was important and moved forward, but it wasn't pushing him to that high stress state. That way he could make sure that he actually finished on time, and he could also be in the headspace that he could be fully engaged and actually present with her. This completely transformed his marriage, and that's why I'm saying you need to figure out what are the ideal life creations, what are the things that in your life are the biggest priorities, and schedule those first. And then when you go into the week, be very deliberate to what you put before and after. That way you're not always going to be rushing around and you can actually follow through with them. The eighth way that effective CEOs manage their time is they clearly communicate how much time they have available, and they stick to that and have the right boundaries in place. Because one of the problems is if you give someone an hour, they'll talk for an hour. If you just don't have a clear time limit in place, they'll ramble on about things that aren't actually important. Whereas if you say to them, look, I've got 15 minutes, what do you need from me? They're going to be far more on point. And this is why you have to get defensive with your time, where you set these clear expectations. A big part of that, as an example, is with meetings. So often I'll speak to overwhelmed CEOs who will say to me that they're just spending their days bouncing around between meetings. Their meeting then overruns, they're trying to catch up, they go into the next one without even having time to think about what's going on, and their days completely get away from them. Such a big part of this is because they're not setting a clear expectation and defending their time. And that's why the way that I always advise that they do it is, rather than trying to create buffers between meetings, which is just going to take up too much of their day, they have to create those by setting clearer expectations. The way that they do that is, let's say you have a meeting at 1, 2, and 3. What you need to do is go into the meeting at 1 o'clock and say, look, I have a hard stop today at 1:50. What that then does is you've created 10 minutes for you to go get a drink, process the problems, and actually think about what you're doing next. The way that you then uphold that is 20 to 25% of the way from the meeting being done, you then start transitioning to it wrapping up. The reason why this is so important is most meetings, like a couple of minutes before the end, people then start to scramble. They're like, we're nearly out of time. What do we need to do next? They're very unfocused and not intentional. Whereas let's say at 22 or 25-2, you say that to them, okay, look, we have 15 minutes left. What other questions do you have? What do you need from me? What are the next steps? Where do we go from here? You can then transition and be deliberate with that time. And like I said, it goes back to that point. If you give someone an hour, they'll talk for an hour. Whereas if you say, look, you've got 15 minutes, what else do you need? They're going to be far more focused and actually move things forward. A big part of this as well is if someone comes to you with a problem, say to them, look, I can help you with this, but I've only got 10 minutes. This is something that I see as incredibly uncomfortable at first, but it's really about holding yourself to the standards of defending your time. Because again, if you just say to someone, look, what do you need? They can then ramble on for an hour. They can go into things that don't actually matter. Whereas if they know they've got a set time, that's going to make it far more focused on what needs to get done. This is all about you managing your time effectively by setting the right boundaries and expectations and then holding yourself and other people to stick within them. The final way that effective CEOs manage their time is through proper planning. You'd be amazed at how many CEOs I speak to who, beyond just having a to-do list, don't really stop to plan their days or think about what they're taking on. And this is a huge issue because what then tends to happen is they just go in and they either work on things that feel important in the moment or that they want to do, or they just get pulled into reactive problems where they're bouncing around from one issue to the next. And this is why so often they have days where come the end of it, despite being busy, they don't actually know what they got done. And this is why if you really want to effectively manage your time, you need to really plan what you're taking on. That doesn't mean spend hours on it, but you need a game plan, not just for the day, but that factors in your week and your month and your long-term goals and KPIs. This is something that is going to be out of the realm of what I dive into in this video, but I do have another video and training where I'm going to show you everything from how to get clear on what to focus on and prioritize, how to structure your days and weeks, how to really have a rolling month so that you know your key commitments and priorities and using that to factor in what you actually commit to and take on. So I'm going to put a link to that you can access in the description of this video. But there you have it. There are 9 things that you can do to really start to manage your time, to maximize your days, and actually make sure the things that you commit to drive the business forward. If you do have any questions on this, feel free to leave them in the comments or to drop me an email using the address in the description of this video. You can also dive into a lot of these ideas further in my book, The Effective CEO, which again, I'll leave the links down below. So I've been Byron Morrison. Make sure you give this video a like and hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss future videos, and I'll see you in the next one.